I now ask Lana Hung and Kyle Hassam from Ashbury State High School to deliver their student presentation on the importance of the Pensacola Convoy.
In the history for the Battle of Australia, one of the darkest times was December 1941, with the Japanese juggernaut knifing through the Pacific, the British being bombed on a daily basis, and our troops a world away in North Africa. The prospects for this isolated nation seemed bleak. Yet, it is in a time of most fearsome darkness that a ray of hope can shine the brightest. Such as it was on the 22nd of December when Australia played host to the naval forces of the United States in a group whose name would bring comfort and relief to thousands, the Pensacola Convoy. A major flotilla of 8 armoured vessels, ranging from gunboats to troop transporters to merchant carriers. The convoy brought field artillery, bombers, pilots and interceptors, and over 5 battalions of combat troops, with 26,000 Air Force personnel. But it brought something much more priceless to Australia: support and alliance at a time when the nation was ready to undergo the greatest battle of its history. At the head of this awesome force was the Pensacola itself, a heavy cruiser named after a city that had been a haven for loyalists during the War of Independence. 150 years after that conflict, the Pensacola would be a relief for another group of former colonists at war for their country on the other side of the world. At the time that the Pensacola Convoy left its home port, the US was not yet in the conflict. The convoy's original purpose was to supply and reinforce the US base at Manila. With a surprise Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7th, the Pensacola Convoy needed to be rerouted to a secure berth. The eventual choice was Brisbane. On December 22nd, the US convoy that had embarked from America in peace arrived in Australia in war, and the battle for Australia had truly begun. For visitors to Hamilton Wharf on that momentous day nearly 82 years ago, the arrival of the Pensacola Convoy must have evoked feelings of awe, relief and trepidation about the great task for the newly allied nation that was to come, but also an awareness that we were no longer alone. As a symbol of the new alliance, the Pensacola was escorted to its safe berth by aircraft from the Royal Australian Air Force, offering support and protection in return for that which the newly arrived military force would offer for the next 4 turbulent years. To those watching that morning in the predicament of Hamilton, we now call Pensacola Convoy Place. The dark days ahead must have seemed a little clearer and brighter. The elation felt by the arrival of the convoy was to be a welcome one, but it was also a brief respite. Within weeks, the vessels and troops of the convoy would be in active service in the Pacific cauldron. The arrival of the convoy was not without its problems. The unloading of the vast arsenal was assigned to inexperienced hands. Engines and spare parts were found to be defective. Enemy vessels blocked safe routes to Manila and East Indies, and American soldiers found themselves at times in conflict with Australian troops, whose culture and attitude to the war did not always match their own. In March 1942, a section of the Pensacola Convoy sent to the East Indies was captured and forced to surrender at the Battle of Java. Only a short time after the bombing of Darwin, the prospects for the Battle of the Allies hardened forces of the rising sun started to look bleak again. But as mighty navies met in the Coral Sea and Midway, as the air wing of the Pensacola was pressed into service, raining fire on the invader forces, and as Brisbane was transformed into an armed camp that would form the massive counter-strike against Japan in the Pacific, the hope that had first been a dream with the arrival of the Pensacola fleet was to become a reality that would bring security, safety, and final victory in the battle for Australia. At the outbreak of World War II, US President Roosevelt declared that in the war against the Axis dictators, America would become an arsenal for democracy for Australia. This was rarely more true with the arrival of the Pensacola Convoy in December 1941. Against the combined steel and force of the Japanese air, sea, and land forces, the resolve and strength of Australia would be boosted by the commitment and force of the US, and a friendship forged in the fire of war would be tested in the jungles of New Guinea, the waters of the Pacific, and finally, the shores of the islands of Japan. The battle for Australia was never meant to be easy, but with the outstretched hand of the US in the form of the Pensacola Convoy, it was a battle where we would not be alone.
We will now proceed with the laying of wreaths, and I ask Her Excellency if she would lay the first wreath, to be followed in the order I call. Her Excellency the Honourable Dr. Jeanette Young, Governor of Queensland.